Wow. Oh, that's brutal. Oh gosh. Oh wow. Well, you can nap this afternoon, I trust. Okay. Okay.
Go
All
to the
right.
office, close the door.
I'm just gonna have this right here like that. Don't worry if you leave the screen. Don't worry about that. Like if you're walking around. All right. I'm gonna go rally folks. Did the service go long? No, I was just talking back. It was about an hour service.
Just about an hour, maybe 58 minutes.
Okay.
No,
All right.
you're fine. I thought your sermon was short, Bobby.
It was. I cut some stuff out. So yeah.
Do you have time this week to?
Then always the way. Gotta cut.
I know. Well, the 9 o'clock, they got the long one, and I was like, I don't need this page. What was that?
Do you have time this week to have a quick meeting?
Yeah, I do.
What day?
I do. Probably Tuesday Tuesday afternoon, or maybe
After your
Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon.
Tuesday afternoon. What time is your staff?
It's 10:30 to about 11:30.
So let's say 1-ish.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Put it on calendar.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let me go rally.
I think someone needs to tell them. They're staying. Yeah.
Oh. Morning.
Hello. I know Wilder wanted to go to this. Let me see if I can. Are you going to start? I'm just anything wanted to do this.
We're flexible.
She's going to rally people. I know nobody does because nobody.
Oh, the Girl Scout 57 Live. Yeah. It's not
Is anyone telling everyone to come?
Yeah. I see people moving in. Hello. I know. Maybe the next lecture we will. I think we should make it sort of like a sip and eat, like a Las Vegas show. Why is that a bad idea?
Well, because this is good.
You do. It's a big prospect now. So I got foundation. They have structural review so we have well from yes, that's what I'm trying to have that fall. Foundation so structurally it's not structural.
Get church to do this.
Yeah. Got a lot of stuff to say.
So you're gonna be doing that May 4th concert? With Matt? We have a new concert. It's a big weekend. I think we always, that always conflicts. We can never go to that. So you're the first weekend, it's the first Sunday.
Okay. So you got to be pacing around for like 10 minutes. You have to be pacing around for 10 minutes. Okay. Is this about time? I'll go ahead and get started. Mike's not that sensitive at all. Thank you all for coming. My name is Russell Grant, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm going to go over the 20s, 30s, and 40s at St. James. So right off the bat, it's 1920, and this is the parish messenger. This is just an image from our archives. This is the predecessor of the emails that you received every week. This was a periodical, actually. It was a subscription-based periodical, and people would pay for this subscription, and it was funded by people paying for the subscription, and there were actually also advertisements throughout the parish messenger, and people would receive this on about a monthly basis at this time. It wasn't a weekly email. So this is January 1920, and the first thing is the rector's resignation, and the rector at that time was Alan Gilbert. And the parish messenger talks about how there's a new campaign to bring a new rector in to replace Alan Gilbert. He left to be the executive secretary of the Social Service Commission of the diocese, which sounds like a blast. And this, you can see there's a stamp at the top, like a 1-cent stamp. That was because this was a subscription. And it's a penny stamp. And this was from a volume that was paid for. The binding was paid for by Carl Panthan Sr. in 1938. So I think this would have been his personal copy that he probably would have received. And he would have, with great foresight, kept it and held onto it for 18 years and then had it bound and put into the, found its way into our archive. So good for him. And this is Alan Chalmers, and this is Harry Price, and this is the organist, Hugh Ross. So the church's growth was very quick during this period. Just to give you a sense of the growth, in 1920, when Alan Chalmers first arrived, there were 190 families on the parish list, so not bad. But by 1926, just 6 years later, there were 440. In 1920, there were 110 enrolled in the Sunday school, and by 1926, there were 270. And just zooming ahead to 1942, the membership, by 1942, Harry Price would already have been the rector. The membership continued growing. There were 894 families and a total of 2,613 baptized people. So the church needed a little bit more space than they had at the time. The vestry authorized the construction of the church house, which is that building with the assembly hall. And the architect selected was Hobart Upjohn. I don't know why I put this on the screen because the plaque is right there. Hobart Upjohn was the architect that was selected to build the church house and the additions at that time. Hobart Upjohn was a Scarsdale resident, He was a very eminent architect. His father was Richard M. Upjohn, also an eminent architect. Richard M. Upjohn, the father, designed lots of buildings, including the Connecticut State Capitol, which I think is easily the most beautiful state capitol in our country. And together, those two also designed the Church of St. Joseph of Arimathea, which is kind of an interesting church given its relationship with our church. And Hobart's grandfather was also an eminent architect. He designed Trinity Wall Street, so perhaps you've heard of that. It's fair to say that Richard Upjohn was the dean of designing Episcopal churches in the United States. He designed over 60. And Hobart Upjohn himself was no slouch. He designed this building. He designed lots of buildings that are educational buildings and also churches. He designed the Scarsdale Baptist Community Church, which is just towards the village center, and that's probably why their church is almost as pretty as ours. And he also designed the Scarsdale Women's Club. He designed that bathing complex you see at Rye Beach, which would probably be much nicer if it weren't in such bad shape. So you can drive all over Westchester County and all over the country and see buildings designed by these three Upjohns. Let's see. So just to give you a sense quickly of the overview, the cloisters are not here yet. Those are much later, but the church burned 1882. It was quickly rebuilt in 1884, forming the nave, which is that part over there. And then in 1922, the church house is built to accommodate the growing church. The crossing, the transepts, and the chancel are added in 1925. 1944, there's going to be another expansion that the vestry will authorize that sort of takes you into the 50s, but I'm just going to leave that out just to let you know that happened. This is a postcard from our church in 1904, or thereabouts. It was sent in 1904. The picture might have been from a little bit earlier. And then 1905, still you can see, I like this picture a lot because it has this beautiful sepia tone, and it's a great view of our church. You can see how rural and country our church was at that time, because there's just this beautiful stone wall, there's like a gate, it's like a pasture was right next door, and you've got these little whippersnappers doing whatever they're doing. But this is 1925, so the church kind of already looks very modern to what we see today. This tree's here, but you can't see it. But there would be, this is where the cloisters would come in later, but at this time, it's just this church. And then 1930, this is a better view, I think, and you can see our church looks the way it does. Louise Clark notes in her book that a steeple was meant to be completed by 1930, but that never happened. And I remember, I didn't know about this until Mother Storm said something about it. She described it as a stump in one of her sermons, and it is stumpish. I never missed it because our church is so pretty. I never would have thought that there was a steeple missing. But now that I see this rendering, I kind of miss it a little bit because I think it was very pretty with our church sort of like poking out over the foliage and the sort of dominating the town. I think it would have been quite lovely, but may never happen. I know. Priorities, goals, 2025 goals, right? So that takes us to 1940, and 1940 began the years of Harry Price. Alan Chalmers was, by all accounts, a very beloved church rector. His wife was a busy lady as well. Ruth Chalmers was the editor of the Scarsdale Inquirer, which was an excellent paper, I thought. I mean, if you're like me, you were sad to see that it folded, but she was a very serious editor and got a lot of accolades for her work at the Scarsdale Inquirer. She was involved in the Women's Club, and the Women's Club purchased the Scarsdale Inquirer for $1 in 1919. She was the editor, and they would hold on to it until 1959, when it was sold off again. In 1930, though, I just want to mention that the church bought Reverend Chalmers a Ford. So it was very common for like the church's rector to have like a car. And that was the first car that the church bought for a rector. And that was probably the inflection point that our parking dilemma began. It is, yeah. So just to give you a sense of like how the community around us was evolving, in 1920, Scarsdale's population was approximately 3,500. Just 10 years later, it had well more than doubled. It was 10,000. In 1940, the population had increased to 13,000. And even during the decade that saw World War II, the population of Scarsdale increased modestly. And there were entries in the Parish Messenger about how during the Chalmers years, he would talk about how there would be like 4 families showing up one Sunday, 2 the next, 3 the next, and it was just like shooting fish in a barrel. Everyone was just coming here. It helped that the Bronx River Parkway had opened in 1924, and the electrification of the Harlem Railroad, which was the Harlem Line, that was completed in 1912 all the way up to White Plains. So Scarsdale was a very desirable place to live and a place that was accessible to people coming from New York City. Harry Price became the rector in 1940, but he had already been here since 1931. He was the assistant rector starting in 1931, and he had a lot of increasing responsibilities. At one point, he had received an offer to go to a parish in Chicago, and so Reverend Chalmers, being a gentleman, offered to step aside and become the rector emeritus, but only on the condition that the vestry hire Harry Price to become the rector, which they did. Harry Price was probably not a hard person to read for the people who were in the church on Sunday morning and who knew him personally. But looking back, certain things emerge, even though you can't talk to him personally. He was for sure a thinker, and he was a visionary. And his vision was education for everyone, but especially for young men and women. He cared a lot about education, and he cared about religious education in particular. The church was big at this time, and the church school was a big deal too. So the parish messenger in December 1941, it's written that St. James has not one of, but the largest white, their words, not mine, Sunday schools in the Diocese of New York with 650 enrolled young people. I know. And Guy Emery Schiffler Jr., who wrote frequently in the Parish Messenger, said, and I quote, "Harry Price studied the Scarsdale public school statistics for the past 10 years. He found that the average attendance for his Sunday school was about 8% below that of the public schools. So it's roughly the same as the public schools, 92%, almost there. And then Mr. Schiffler effortlessly and unironically makes the point, hammers it home and says, children are forced to go to public school. They attend St. James voluntarily. And the word voluntarily was not in scare quotes in the parish register. And he cared about this in part because of what was going on in the world, I think. He wrote at one point that he thought that the fanaticism of the Hitler Youth movement was in part driven by people looking to fill some type of void. And so he saw his religious education sort of stepping in and filling that void and sort of, neutralizing that interest that might have gone into some type of fanaticism of that sort. He had help from Mrs. Isom. So for those of you who are wondering who Mrs. Isom was, she was the head of religious education until 1941 when she resigned. And just to give you a sense of the energy of Harry Price's efforts at education, there were Latin and Greek courses in the church house from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. on Monday nights. So work that into your schedule. And throughout the parish messenger, he would sort of offer up some reading for people to pass the time till supper. And one of the things that he offered up was, and this is typical, the Divine Comedy, The City of God by St. Augustine, Selected Writing by Thomas Aquinas, The Brothers Karamazov, and I will confess to having read none of these. Every list would have at least one book by C.S. Lewis, usually more than one. And this is sheer speculation on my part, but I do wonder if he might have been something of, a missionary or an evangelist, at least as far as Episcopalians in the 40s go. He wrote in the Parish Messenger very optimistically at one point about China and a potential for a spiritual awakening in the Far East. So much for that. And he was a man of the world. In 1941, he lamented in the Rector's Word, which was sort of like if the Parish Messenger had like an editorial page, it would have been the Rector's Word. He lamented discrimination in employment, segregation in housing, and public transportation. Just from reading Louise Clark's book, you would be struck that he was probably some type of kindly man. He doesn't look menacing, he has very pleasant features. He cared a lot about the kids, but I think it might be a mistake to assume that he was entirely kindly. I recently learned, and this is just hearsay, but it's hearsay from Louise, that he had sermons that contained an above average amount of fire and brimstone. If people missed church on Sunday, this is just hearsay, that he would show up to their home. And as far as I know, he didn't show up with hired goons, but I don't think it was entirely a welfare check or impromptu visit. I think he liked having butts in the seats, and I think he liked being the biggest church in Westchester County, or one of. But like I said, he cared a lot about the education of the children. He would often make tours to New England during the school year to visit kids from St. James who were in college. He frequently visited sort of around the Amherst, Holyoke, Smith area where a lot of young kids would go. And you know this because every parish messenger at some point during the year would have a list of where all the youngsters are going to school if they were away at boarding school or if they were away at college or university. He would sort of list where everyone went to. I want to cover one person who I think is a bit more interesting than Harry Price, if you can imagine, and that's William Kernan, who was our assistant rector during the time. And this is Father Coughlin. I didn't know who Father Coughlin was, but he was a very well-known radio personality during his time. He was, I think it's fair to say, anti-Semitic and very loud and proud with that. And William Kernan was the assistant rector at St. James. He had a radio show on WEVD. The EVD is Eugene V. Debs. It was a socialist radio station. First clues in the call sign. And I don't know what was in it, but I think it's fair to say that he was probably trying to confront Father Coughlin from his own radio platform. Father Coughlin had probably 15 million listeners in the 40s and 50s, which, our country had 200 million people back then. So like 15 million is a good number for today. It was a fabulous number for back then. He eventually sort of triggered his own downfall. The Catholic Church had enough of him and said, either stop doing this or you're getting defrocked. And if you're defrocked, you can't really have a platform. Anyway. But he also wrote, William Kernan did, an open letter to Father Coughlin where he basically said, everything you're saying is wrong, stop doing this, and no one likes this, why don't you just quit? William Kernan is very interesting, though. He wasn't without his own controversy. And he arrived in Scarsdale approximately January 1940. He came from Trinity Church in Bayonne. That when he wrote this, it was still, you can see, if you can see really close, like Superman. He wrote, it's written there that he was the rector of Trinity Church in Bayonne, New Jersey. But he didn't come to Scarsdale because he had a job at St. James. That happened very quickly and a little bit later. He wrote in his autobiography, and I don't think he's entirely reliable in his autobiography, that he came to Scarsdale because he found like an affordable place to live. I think in the 40s, Scarsdale probably was already not known for affordable. He had 4 children, so I just don't believe that he left his position voluntarily to come to Scarsdale because he heard it was cheap. And then he got a job at St. James, but he first became a communicant, and then Harry Price offered him a job. And the reason why it kind of doesn't really make sense to me he just lucked out. He came here like a few months later, he happened to get right over the target and find a job, is because the vestry at Bayonne already had their noses out of joint because of all of his extra parochial activities. And so I think he probably was asked to leave. The reason why I think Harry Price might have been someone who was just sorting out a mess because Harry Price might have been the rock. And at that time, and I don't know if this is still true, but I think if a rector was unemployed and didn't have any prospects, they would sort of become the charge of the bishop. So the bishop was, I think, responsible for their welfare at that time. I don't know if that's still true. When he came to Scarsdale, he became later on involved in something called the Scarsdale Citizens Committee. And there's a big do-up at the library about all of this. It was basically a group of people, and it was more or less coterminous with the McCarthy era, where people were trying to ferret out Marxist ideology and communist ideology creeping into the school, creeping into the curriculum. He did not have a lot of success at the challenging the school district on this. The school district had a lot of faith in their teachers and their administrators and the curriculum that they had. And Scarsdale's really not the place to come to and say like your curriculum sucks. But some of the books that he wanted banned were books by Howard Fast, who was a Jewish writer and wrote Spartacus. He wanted to ban books by Langston Hughes because he was considered by William Kernan to be a communist. And Langston Hughes was actually before the McCarthy Commission, and he really went out of his way to say, like, I'm not a communist. If I happen to have any beliefs that are shared with him, it really is by accident. I'm not interested in the communist at all. He denounced the communist as best he could, distanced himself, wasn't really good enough. But I don't want to say that like William Kernan was this insufferable person who, was my way or the highway, doctrinaire about everything, or was like a bad person. He was really a rabid, not rabid, I don't want to say rabid. He was like a very strong anti-communist guy. He was an anti-Nazi guy. He was an anti-Semite guy. He really held a lot of interesting beliefs. He wasn't a communist, but he supported union organizing. So he was really interested in, I think, what he thought was his principles of justice. He wrote in the Parish Messenger, "Communism is an unmitigated evil which denies God and dehumanizes man, that it is a conspiracy to destroy our free society." Talking about Mr. Fast, he wrote, is a professional writer who deliberately, shockingly perverted, distorted, or denied the facts of American history. He has vilified American ideas and ideals. He has sought to foment prejudices and hatred among classes, races, and religious groups in this country. And he continues, it's not hard to go into the Parish Messenger and find something where he's talking about communists and Nazis. He says, "We should beware in America of the apologists for communism and Nazism who plead that the ferocious persecution is merely a manifestation of excessive zeal characteristic of all revolutions." And then he says, "Will Christians who believe in love and justice come to the defense of the poor, the sharecroppers, the underprivileged? Will Christians stand against the communists and their theory of class rule, against the Nazis and their theory of race rule? In short, having done so much to form this American society, will we now have the courage and faith to make sure that it be just in all of its dealings with men?" So a very complicated person. He had principles for sure, and that's him. And that's 1941, October. So I just want to throw it out there. If your premise is that like whatever's going on in the Parish Messenger is what's going on in society at large, is there a particular date in 1941 that you would be most curious about? Yeah, that's what I thought too. December the 7th, 1941, which was Pearl Harbor. And I was expecting to go to the December one or the one thereafter, the January one after Pearl Harbor had happened. And I expected to hear Harry Price just, go into town against the Empire of Japan. But that's not what happened. In fact, I kept flipping forward and flipping forward and flipping forward. And maybe I overlooked it, but maybe some pages were stuck together. But I never once saw Pearl Harbor in the Parish Messenger. And I really would have expected to see that. I mean, we kind of have a sense that, I think it's fair to say that everyone was geared up against the Nazis at that time. And if Father Kernan is any indication, I think Harry Price was probably sort of on the same page with Kernan with regard to that. It would make sense that he was. But there was nothing really about Pearl Harbor. And I will say, though, that, I'll come to that. I will say, though, that, the U.S. was already at war with Germany before Pearl Harbor, for a year at least. We'd already had the Selective Service Act. It was kind of a little bit more narrow, but after Pearl Harbor, it immediately expanded in terms of the age groups that it was going to capture. And there were already members of our parish who were in service. And Harry Price would sometimes take the letters that he received from them and would anonymize the letters and publish them in the parish messenger. And they were really nice letters. They weren't, bloodthirsty soldiers spoiling for a fight. They were just, people doing what they had to do. And I want to talk about one particular veteran that I think doesn't get a lot of mention in our church, but that is John Parker Compton. And I think it's fair to say that the standout veteran for our church was probably Scarsdale Jack, the fighter ace. There's a movie starring John Wayne called The Flying Tigers. And John Wayne's character is probably like a composite character. One of the real people that character might have been based on was, Scarsdale Jack. So you can't really beat, John Wayne. But I think that John Parker Compton's story is at least as interesting. He was from a very wealthy family. His father was William H. Danforth, or his grandfather was William H. Danforth, who was the founder of Ralston Purina of St. Louis. The Danforth family, if you go to St. Louis, the Danforths are probably to this day the most eminent family in St. Louis. They lived in Scarsdale, and there were 4 children in the Danforth family that were members of our church. There was John Parker Compton, Ann Compton, William Compton, and James Compton. All 4 served in the military during World War II. William was in the South Pacific on a motor torpedo boat. When he wasn't on the motor torpedo boat, he also designed a small Navy chapel in the Solomon Islands. And he survived the war, but came home and died of polio in the 50s, just a few months before the Salk vaccine was approved. And James, the other brother, led a Marine platoon onto Iwo Jima on the 2nd invasion day in Iwo Jima. He survived the war and lived a long life. And then there was Anne Randolph Compton, who was stationed with the Red Cross in Europe. Our guy, John Parker Compton, was an excellent skier. He had gone to boarding school at Exeter and La Rosaine, Switzerland, and he became just a fabulous skier. And he was a natural at being a soldier. He was in something called the 10th Mountain Division, which was the Winter Army. And they were troops that could ski, that could shoot, that were just equipped for harsh winter warfare, especially in a place like where he ended up, which was the Apennines in Italy. And he was in something called Operation Encore, which was the Allies' attempt to break through the Gothic line, which was the Nazi fortifications that came all the way down into Italy. He was still training at Camp Hale in Colorado on June the 6th, 1944, when D-Day happened. And he wasn't sent to Europe, or he wasn't fighting in Europe until nearly a year later in March, 1945. So the D-Day had already happened. I think it's fair to say the war had decidedly turned against the Nazis at that point. They were just digging in. And his story goes like this. So he was, on March the 3rd, he was involved in an assault on the village of Iola in the Apennines. And he was struck by a sniper's bullet and killed instantly. So that was his very first day of combat in Italy. He was killed by a sniper. And that was March the 3rd, 1945. He was 20 years old. So there are 66,000 approximately veterans from World War II who are still alive today. And he was 20 years old when he died. So if he were alive today, he could be alive. He could be 100. He could be among that 66,000 that are still with us. The youngest of the World War II veterans are in their late 90s. So it's possible that he could have been there. There's a story that's tied to Compton's death. It's one shared by the Compton Foundation. And it might be a little bit embellished. It sounds a little bit James Bond, but like a lot of things that happened during World War II, they're actually worse than the stories. But there was a story that what was happening was that he was parachuted behind the Nazi lines to go to a church in Iola. So this is a terrible map, but it's a map, which is his division would have come through here into Iola. And then he was trying to rescue or to sort of bring to safety a priest and some other people that were held up in a church in Iola. And that's when the snipers, killed him. And then the Nazis burned the church and murdered everyone inside. So This is from Google Street View. I probably could have gotten a better picture, but I just think it's neat that you can get it from Google Street View. This is the church in Eola, the Church of St. Mary Magdalene in Eola. You can't read it because I can't read it from here, but you have to take my word for it. This is a plaque dedicated to the memory of John Parker Compton. Like I said, his family was very wealthy, so after the war they wanted to do something, so they helped the community in Eola rebuild this church, and there's a plaque there in his memory. So John Parker Compton, after he died, just 2 months and change, on May the 8th, was Victory in Europe Day, so he very nearly did survive the war, and he very nearly could have been here today, and Japan surrendered on August the 15th, 1945. That's the end of the war. Oh, here are some quotes from him. He wrote these really nice letters to his mom. I don't have the letters, they're in a box in the Denver Library, I didn't go there, but they were in a book called The Winter Army, and that's where I got this picture as well, where it was talking about how good he was. He loved being at Camp Hale in Colorado. He got up, and all of his members in his unit got up at 5:30 a.m., hiked 2 miles, and they had a marksmanship competition. He got the highest score, and he nearly beat the all-time record. The last letter to his mother, his parents, he writes, "I'm still in the land of olives and signorinas and feeling fine." So that was March the 23rd, 1945. He died on, February the 23rd. He died on March the 3rd. So his parents probably would have received this letter like after he'd been killed. So that's the end of the war, and you can see the rector's word, the very first page. This is the way it looked like under the Harry Price years. It's a little bit more ornate and a little bit bigger, the Paris Messenger. And then these are the people who passed away from our church. It's the same as this plaque over here. There's a bronze plaque commemorating these people, and you can see John Parker Compton's name there. Just to give you a sense of how big our church still was and how involved everyone was in the war, there were 380 members of our parish who were serving in the war or have perished. So it's a lot, 380. So that's the end of the war. And, meanwhile, back at the ranch, William Kernan, the war is over so he can train his energy on his old nemesis, which is communism. And this is why I think that he and Harry Price were on the same page as far as the communists go. And I want to say that if you thought that William Kernan trying to ban books by Howard Fast, Langston Hughes might secretly have been, anti-Semitism or anti-Black racism, I would offer up that the rector and the executive committee of the Men of St. James, even the Anglicans were not safe if they were communist. And they telegraphed a letter to the State Department to protest the travel visa of the Red Dean of Canterbury, Hewlett Johnson. And I didn't know who Hewlett Johnson was, but he was known commonly as the Red Dean of Canterbury Cathedral. And he was not an undercover Soviet spy. He was openly a proponent of the Soviet Union. Even before the war started, Britain was already at war with the Nazis, and he was opposed to the war with Nazi Germany. He said he was in favor of peace. And then once the Nazis attacked Stalin in 1941, that's when he kind of changed his tune a little bit and said, let's actually go to war with the Nazis. So Harry Price didn't like that. He didn't want Hewlett Johnson to be granted a visa. Okay, so that's controversies that have been sort of touching and concerning our church, but not really within our church. And I want to talk about, lastly, one thing, which is high church and low church. And I didn't know what the difference was because I just think of Episcopalians as pretty high up there, have always been high up there in terms of church, high church or low church. So does anyone have a definition of what high church is or what low church is? You stole my thunder. No cheating from Mother Storm. Yes.
Bells and smells.
Bells and smells. Yeah, I like it. Anyone else?
Years ago, I was some of the choir out at St. Joseph Fair,
Good point. That's a good one.
and that's the first, I got an education there, because that's when I actually found out what the church was.
Yeah.
Because 3 out of the 4 Sundays, the choir, I mean, they had the Eucharist at their 8 o'clock service, but
Yeah.
for the choir, it was at 10 o'clock that they don't always have morning prayer.
Yeah.
So, except for one Sunday. But that was low church.
Yeah.
Where they don't have the Eucharist.
Yeah, and those are all good examples because for people who didn't like high church and they wanted to go low church, they would go to St. Joseph of Arimathea. That was the out. Yes.
Yeah, similarly, I grew up in Arizona, and I went to a private faith school at Episcopal Church.
Yeah.
Even though I wasn't technically Episcopalian, but we had low church and high church. Every day we had chapel,
Mhm.
and I was considered more low church. And then Thursdays we would have the high church with incense.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, St. Michael's of Angels, I still think to this day, all of the children at the school, starts at preschool and goes to 8th grade, we were all required to learn Latin.
Okay.
All of our masses
Yeah.
were in Latin.
Okay.
Every Thursday. And part of being, and it's interesting because I had several of my best friends from St. Michael's of Angels were Jewish. Some of them were
Okay.
Orthodox Jewish. So they had this, it was a very good school, so it was an interesting mix of kids from all different backgrounds and different origins. And that's why they kind of moved to more of a low church.
Yeah.
Because you had other paying, and
Yeah.
the church school supported the main church.
Yeah. And that's a good example because one of the things that I found out is that there's something called broad church as well, or I don't know if that's like a term of art, but I've seen that term thrown around. So between low and high, there's a broad church, and it would make sense to call it that since they're trying to catch a broader group of people. Well, like I said, I didn't know anything about it, and if Mother Storm hadn't told me, alerted me to it, I would not have even known to go and look for it. So I wanted to sort of bring you the most authoritative, definitive definition I could come up with. So I went to Reddit, which is my North Star. And I have like some little screenshots for you. And the first definition right off the bat, I like it. It says, the higher you are, the more Catholic your service looks. And I can confirm from Pedro, like he likes coming here because he doesn't have to learn anything new from his years of being a Catholic. It just slots right in, it's like downward compatibility. And then here's a more granular definition from Reddit. There's a fixed form liturgy, check. Being read from a missal, liturgical clothing, check. Possibly incense. People have asthma. Belief that sacraments are being performed. I think that's important. And then low church is more spontaneous, Baptist, Pentecostal, focus on internal disposition over appearance, blah, blah, blah. This is social media, so nothing gets settled until there's a gutter war. Affirming Anglican comes in, sounds like very authoritative, and says, you're confusing low church with contemporary. Here are 2 examples of low church, and they offer up Grace Church, New York, and Christ Church, Philadelphia. And I was expecting someone to say this. I mean, incense, I think, is right on the money, but this person writes, Grace Church, New York City used to have a mass at 6 o'clock on Sundays. Oh, wait, no, sorry. This is what I wanted to say. See, not a guitar in sight. So continuing on with the Episcopalian Reddit, here's some more sniping. The original poster says, I was equating contemporary worship with being lower than low, the same way Anglo-Catholic is higher than high. And affirmative Anglican shoots back, musical style does not denote churchmanship. I'm not inclined to agree. And then affirming Anglican gets all huffy and says, so a Roman Catholic guitar mass is low church, but Methodist service with choir and organ is high church. But what about their theological beliefs? That's a good point, though. And then the OP says, I would say that's pretty broad. This isn't a dissertation. Kindly lighten up. So despite all of the sniping and snipe remarks, I think that's actually not the worst definition I've heard. High church, stick out your incense. Emphasis on ceremony, liturgy, realness of sacraments. There's something called apostolic succession, which, let me just read this because I'll get it wrong if I don't. This is what ChatGPT told me about apostolic succession. Oh, I don't have it, but you'll just, oh, here it is. Apostolic succession in the high church tradition refers to the belief that bishops derive their spiritual authority from an unbroken line of consecration tracing back to the apostles. And if you think about William Kernan and Harry Price, William Kernan's autobiography was called My Road to Certainty. And I don't know what he's talking about, but certainty, it kind of seems like he's talking about that certainty from the apostolic succession. And this morning when I was reading the Nicene Creed, I never thought about it, but it says one apostolic and Catholic church. And so I think the theological beliefs that affirming Anglican was snippily talking about might have been the apostolic succession. And then low church, see the guitar? Less formal, evangelical Protestant, personal faith and scripture over sacraments, less hierarchical and less likely to emphasize apostolic succession. Is that how they taught it at Yale?
More or less.
More or less, okay. I just wanted to do like a sanity check.
I'll put that.
You know, I was looking at this, I wonder if this could be worse. So that's pretty much it. I will not venture outside the 40s and 50s except to say that the certainty of the Catholic Church was ultimately going to be irresistible to William Kernan and Harry Price with very dramatic effect. And then this last slide, I call it as per usual. Oh wait, no, sorry, this is not the last slide. This is the next to last slide. So sacraments are real, that was a thing, and Harry Price wrote